In October 1891, an old German prospector lay dying in a bakery owner's house in Phoenix, Arizona. He had almost nothing to his name: a flooded homestead, a few possessions, a candle box under the bed. Inside the candle box was 48 pounds of high-grade gold ore, and in his final days between fevers, he tried to tell the woman nursing him where it came from. A mine, he said, out in the Superstition Mountains, rich beyond reason, hidden beyond finding. He died before anyone could write it down properly. Nobody ever has found it. They have never stopped looking. In the 130 years since Jacob Waltz died, his mine has consumed life savings and long summers, and more than once, the searchers themselves. By one widely cited estimate, 9,000 people a year still go into those mountains carrying some version of his secret. The United States Geological Survey will tell you flatly that the gold shouldn't exist. The 48 pounds of ore say otherwise. This is the story of the lost Dutchman mine, a treasure that has paid out exactly $0 in a century and a third, and somehow made a fortune anyway. The real mine in this story is not in the mountains at all. Start with the man because he was real. The census says so, the land records say so, even if almost everything else about him is fog. Jacob Waltz emigrated from Germany in the 1840s. The Dutchman is frontier shorthand for Deutsch, not Holland, and spent decades doing what thousands of men did after the California rush following gold across the West. He worked claims, he prospected, and by the 1870s and 80s he had settled onto a homestead on the Salt River near Phoenix, an aging man growing chickens where a city was starting to happen. Here is what separates Waltz from every other old prospector with a story. From time to time, by multiple period accounts, he paid for things with high-grade gold ore that matched no known local mine. Not dust, not coins, rich golden quartz, source unstated. Neighbors noticed. Waltz never said where it came from. Then, in February 1891, the Salt River flooded catastrophically and took his homestead. Sick, ruined. And in his 80s, Waltz was taken in by Julia Thomas, a 29-year-old businesswoman who ran a bakery and ice cream parlor in Phoenix. She nursed him for months as pneumonia closed in, and in his final weeks he began to talk. What exactly Jacob Waltz said in that back room is the most argued-over conversation in the history of American treasure. The outline is Julia Thomas and a young helper named Reinhard Petrasch later told it. There was a mine in the Superstition Mountains east of the city, rich ore close to the surface, directions in fragments, a needle-shaped peak, a canyon, landmarks that made sense to a man who'd ridden that country for decades and to almost nobody else. A rival version came from Dick Holmes, another man at the deathbed, who claimed Waltz gave him the true account, and the two claim chains have feuded in print for 130 years. No transcript exists. Every version of the clues is secondhand, remembered years later by people who each had reasons to be the rightful heir. The clues cannot all be true. They may none of them be true. But the candle box was true. When Waltz died on October 25, 1891, the ore under his bed was real, physical, assayable, 48 pounds of it rich enough to finance the legend that was about to be born. Skeptics would spend a century explaining away his mine. Nobody has ever fully explained the box. What happened next set the pattern for everything that followed, and it happened fast. Within a year, Julia Thomas sold her bakery to finance an expedition. In the Arizona summer of 1892, she went into the Superstitions with the Petrasch brothers, following a dying man's fragments through some of the most hostile terrain in the Southwest. A maze of volcanic canyons where summer ground temperatures kill, water is a rumor, and every needle of rock looks like the landmark you were told to find. They found nothing. She came out weeks later, exhausted and broke, the first person ruined by Jacob Waltz's secret. Then she did something that would outlast every expedition. She took what she knew, or what she could draw, and began selling copies of a map to the mine. $7 each, about $240 in today's money for a sheet of paper. Within 12 months of Waltz's death, the lost Dutchman mine had already produced its first income, And the income came not from gold, but from the story of gold. The mine's true business model was born in 1892, and it has never changed since. The map pays, the mountain doesn't. For 4 decades, the legend simmered locally. Searchers came and went, maps multiplied, nothing was found. Then in 1931, it went national. Adolph Ruth was a 66-year-old government veterinarian from Washington, D.C., a gentle obsessive with a bad leg, and a treasure map he believed traced back to the Peralta family, an old Spanish-Mexican mining clan whose lost workings had long been folded into the Dutchman story. In June 1931, June in the Superstitions, when the rock itself becomes an oven, Ruth walked into the range to find the mine. He never walked out. 6 months later, searchers found a skull. The Smithsonian's most famous anthropologist, Alois Hrdlicka, matched it to Ruth from photographs and dental records, and then made the case infamous. He read 2 holes in the skull as a rifle shot, fired at close range, in and out. The local sheriff preferred exposure and scavengers. Murder or heat stroke, the case was never solved and remains officially open to this day. But it was what Ruth left behind that lit the fuse. Among his recovered effects was his checkbook, and in it, in his handwriting, a note he'd found it about 200 feet across from cave, and beneath that, 3 words in Latin: Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. A dead man, an unsolved maybe murder, and a written claim of discovery signed like Caesar. The story ran in newspapers coast to coast. The Lost Dutchman stopped being an Arizona tale that summer and became a national obsession, and the mountains have not been empty since. The ledger of the search is written in more than money. Since 1931, the searching has never stopped, and every generation has paid for it. In December 2009, a 35-year-old Denver hotel worker named Jesse Capon, who had spent years privately studying the mine, filling notebooks, planning, went into the Tonto National Forest alone. His remains were found 3 years later in a cliff crevice he had fallen. In July 2010, 3 searchers from Utah, men in their 40s and 60s, went in during extreme heat on their own Dutchman expedition. The search for them was called off after 8 days. Their remains were recovered the following winter. Exposure. That is the arithmetic of a treasure that has never once paid out. Sold businesses, spent retirements, and a slow, steady count of lives across 13 decades, set against total confirmed gold recovered from Jacob Waltz's mine by anyone, ever, 0 ounces. The candlebox remains the only payout the Dutchman has ever made. In 1949, the legend acquired physical artifacts, and the evidence around them tells its own story. The story? A man named Travis Tumlinson, driving Highway 60 near Apache Junction, stops by the roadside and finds carved stone tablets, crude maps cut into rock, Spanish words, a heart-shaped stone that fits a slot, trails and crosses that believers read as the Peralta family's directions to the gold country of the Superstitions. The Peralta stones. They have been photographed, cast, exhibited, and pored over for 75 years. A former Attorney General of Arizona was among the believers who chased them. The case against them, and it is heavy, no photographs of the stones in the ground carvings that show none of the weathering a century of desert should leave lettering that looks suspiciously modern. Historians who spent their lives on the Superstitions concluded, near unanimously, 20th century fakes. The stones are almost certainly not a map to the mine. They are something more useful to this story, proof of demand. By 1949, the Dutchman legend was hungry enough that the market conjured artifacts for it. Fake maps had sold since 1892. The stones were simply the deluxe edition. When belief is strong enough, evidence gets manufactured to meet it. Now the part of the story most retellings skip, what the rocks themselves say. The central Superstition Mountains, the wild interior where the legend points, where Ruth died, where the searchers go, are the remains of ancient volcanic explosions. Rhyolite tuff and dacite welded ash collapsed calderas. And here's the problem that is, by the general verdict of geologists, the wrong rock. Gold veins of the kind in Waltz's candlebox form, in very particular plumbing, the Superstition interior in the mainstream geological view simply doesn't have it. The blunt version, aligned with the U.S. Geological Survey's assessment, has been repeated for decades. There is no gold in the superstitions. And yet, walk to the western foot of the range and you find the Goldfield District. Real mines, real documented production, a genuine little gold rush in the 1890s, a few miles from where the legend lives. That's the escape hatch every believer keeps a key to. The mountains touch gold country, even if they aren't gold country. So where did 48 pounds of rich ore come from? Perhaps a pocket at the range's edge. Perhaps somewhere else entirely. Some argue Waltz's ore chemistry points far from the superstitions altogether. The honest summary: the ore was real, the mine, where the legend puts it, probably is not. The map has been pointing at the wrong mountains for 130 years. Which brings us to the question we parked earlier. If the geology says no and the payout is zero, why do an estimated 9,000 people a year still look? Because the legend is structured so that nothing can kill it. Every part that would normally end a treasure story instead feeds this one. The clues are secondhand and contradictory, so no search can ever definitively fail. You simply had the wrong version. The terrain is a lethal maze, so absence of evidence reads as difficulty, not absence. The searcher dies, and the mystery deepens and the story spreads and more searchers come. Even the geologist's verdict helps. What's more irresistible than gold that officially cannot exist, vouched for by 48 pounds of ore that officially did a fraud like Bre-X, dies the day it's audited? A legend structured like the Dutchman cannot be audited at all. It is unfalsifiable, self-advertising, and anchored to just enough physical truth, the candle box, to survive any debunking. As a gold deposit, the superstitions are barren. As a belief system, they are the richest rock in America, and belief, as we're about to see, keeps very good books. The Lost Dutchman mine pays out every single year, just never in gold. Count it. Julia Thomas's $7 maps were the seed round. Then came the books, hundreds of them across a century. The maps, the magazines, the documentaries, the guided expeditions. In 1965, Apache Junction, the town at the foot of the mountains, began holding Lost Dutchman Days, a rodeo and festival that still runs every year. In 1977, Arizona opened Lost Dutchman State Park on the range's western flank. In 2024 alone, it drew over 130,000 visitors, every one of them paying to stand at the edge of a mine nobody can find. There's a Superstition Mountain Museum, there are trail businesses, outfitters, motels, an entire town whose brand is a dying man's unfinished sentence. Run the honest comparison. Gold produced by the legend's mine in 133 years, not fake. Revenue produced by the legend itself, maps, books, festivals, park gates, tourism, a town's identity, compounding annually since 1892, a fortune paid out steadily for longer than most real mines ever operate. Jacob Waltz's mine turned out to be real after all. It just isn't in the mountains. It is the mountains, plus the story, sold by the ticket, forever. The most productive gold mine in Arizona history never contained an ounce. Last time, the ship of gold, the SS Central America, went down in 1857 with 15 tons of California gold, and the engineer who found her spent nearly 10 years in a jail cell rather than say where the coins went. The final ledger: one real candle box of ore never traced. One businesswoman who went broke on the mountain and got rich on the map. The only person in this story who understood immediately what the Dutchman was actually worth. A century of searchers who paid with savings, summers, and sometimes everything. And a legend that produces more value every year than the mine it describes ever could, precisely because no one can find it. Some treasures pay when you dig them up. The rarest ones pay only as long as you can't. The ground is patient. In Arizona, it's patient and on salary. Next time, two drifters walk into the western desert with a story about diamonds, and the smartest money in San Francisco, bankers, generals, even Tiffany himself, hands them a fortune. It ends with one government geologist, a magnifying glass, and the collapse of a $10 million company.